we have podcasts that are full meals, and then you focus on them and you listen because they are important. And there are podcasts that are just healthy snacks, and these are just good to have them in your body, but those are for entertainment. If the podcast is good and it adds value to your life, you will listen.
Busy is not productive. This show is about the difference. I'm Santi Tacoronte, and on Productivi-Tree, I talk to the thinkers and experts who are reshaping how we understand time, focus, and meaningful work. Subscribe wherever you listen. Let's dig in. Noémi is the co-owner of Podcast Connections, a podcast booking agency she built from the ground up in 2020 and based in Cyprus. She has been working in online content and digital marketing since 2007, and she is a linguist with a master's degree in Danish literature. Her agency runs a fully done-for-you service that matches entrepreneurs and professionals to the right podcast shows. She prepares them as guests and helps them turn podcast appearances into real business growth. She has placed clients on hundreds of shows and is one of the most prolific LinkedIn voices in the podcast space. If anyone knows what separates people who use podcasts to grow from people who just fill their earbuds, it is her. Noémi, welcome to Productivi-Tree.
Thank you so much, Santi, for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to be here.
You've been in online content for many years. You've been doing blogs, videos, and every kind of online content. As a learning form, where do you see podcasts today? And why did they get so popular versus other type of contents that quickly fade away?
This is a very complex question, and I love it. It's a great one. I think it's still a new format when it comes to consuming content, like comparing to blogging or newsletters. Like everybody, talking about that, like blogs are dead, newsletters are dead. They are not, but whatever. But like listening to podcasts, consuming information through podcasts is pretty new. I know that podcasts were alive before 2020, before the pandemic, but the big boom came after 2020. So they are still relatively new and people getting used to it. And because of the format, that it's video, audio, it's so easy to consume. So basically it's people, they kind of stop reading stuff, like stop reading books, and everything is just getting faster. So consuming content, consuming knowledge through podcasts is just so much easier right now. And I think that's why it has a very bright future ahead of it, because people are it's just easy. Like people are lazy usually, and it's just easier for them to do that through podcasts.
I'll tell you a little story, Noémi. When I started listening to audiobooks, and later on podcasts while I was walking or on the gym, at some point I noticed that I was hearing, but I was not listening. Do you think this is a problem or a challenge people face with podcasts today? The angle I'm coming is that I see podcasts as a productivity learning tool more than as an entertainment. And I know there are every kind of podcasts. There are podcasts that are more about entertainment, and I consume some of them. There are some podcasts about jokes that I love because I love a good laugh. So where do you see this heading in combination with the lazy comment that you just said?
It's funny you asked that, because I think problem today's world is we hear, but we don't listen to each other either. And I think that's kind of a problem with podcasts too sometimes. But I would compare this to good nutrition, Santi. This, like, we have podcasts that are full meals, and then you focus on them and you listen because they are important. And there are podcasts that are just healthy snacks, and these are just good to have them in your body, but those are for entertainment. So and to be honest with you, I do listen to podcasts a lot, obviously because of work. But my favorite, when I listen to my favorite podcasts, and for example, I do like cook, or I do my cooking stuff in the evening or anything like that, I focus on the podcast, and I always remember everything. If the podcast is good and it gives you adds value to your life, you will listen no matter what you're doing. If it's just a mediocre podcast, or like it doesn't really catch your attention, I guess you just tune out. But if it's a really good one, I'm talking about like, Louis Ho's School of Greatness or something, you're not going to tune out because the guests and the questions are amazing. So it doesn't really matter what you do. I think it's about the quality of the podcast. If it's good, you won't tune out. But I agree, sometimes happens when you multitask, you lose the attention span of focusing on listening. So yeah, it's like yes and no, like depends on the podcast, I would say.
Mm-hmm. I want to deep dive a little bit on the attention part, Noemi, because there are podcasts that are in nature very long. And
Yes.
my assumption would be that it's difficult or more difficult to keep attention span to them. And there are podcasts that are, we had Laura van der Kam a couple of weeks ago, an incredible book writer and podcaster, and her podcasts are 4 minutes in the morning or 5 minutes. So where do you recommend people to start? In more longer stuff that perhaps is more aligned with their taste, or shorter things that build this muscle of paying attention?
I would say let's start with the shorter version. But it really depends on your personality. If you are into deep conversation, deep, long conversation, and you want to dive deep into them, you can go for something like, an hour-long conversation, or you can split it up. That's what I do many times. Like, okay, I don't have time to listen to the whole interview, but I keep it, I save it, and then I go back and I listen to the rest because it's so fascinating, it's so interesting. But if you are a newbie, when it comes to listening to podcasts, start with shorter format, start with these micro podcasts. It's easy to digest. You always learn something from them. And then you can always go to the, to the longer versions, or the longer podcast.
My dad still has a radio in the washroom, and when he shaves, he plays the radio. Where I'm going is, I come from the radio generation, Noemi. It doesn't exist anymore, as far as I'm concerned, as I'm aware. And it evolved into the video generation. Now, podcasts started the same. Audio, but now Apple is moving into video. YouTube, of course. Spotify is also having video podcast. Is there something in audio that you think is different, better, more special, or sentimental versus videos?
I love this question. By the way, I come from the radio generation too. I born 79, so I was still recording music, from radio. And it's so fascinating to see all these changes. And the thing is that it doesn't really matter that podcasts have a video version. People still consume more audio version because they listen to podcasts on the go. So sometimes it doesn't really matter they have a video version, because they do that on the go, like while driving, gym, cooking, whatever, walking. So I studied some data about this, and people basically listen to more to these interviews, and it doesn't matter they have a video version. But having said that, the video, I think, it kind of brings you the human connection. And I think that's also really important, because you can see the person, you can see their facial expression, whether they're smiling, and you feel them closer to you. It's going to be a more intimate relationship with the guest, in my opinion. But the thing is that people are always rushing, they're always busy. Usually they don't sit there and watching you or during all those interviews. They rather listen to it. But I would say it's a more personal, more human relationship with a podcast interview when you watch it too on YouTube or even on Spotify.
When we started this podcast, Noemi, I was very hesitant to publish video because I was thinking to myself, why will someone spend 45 minutes looking at the screen and seeing two people talk? Right? They'd rather listen to it. That was my thinking behind. But then looking at the Tim Ferriss podcast,
Mhm.
I got exactly into the same point that you just said, right? Seeing the facial expressions, it's an added value. You can do without, but they say there is something, and I must admit that there is people that is great at putting these facial expressions that bring a lot of emotion to what they're saying. You, for example, with your beautiful smile.
Thank you.
Now, Noemi, you work professional job is to match people or figure out what someone should be listening to professional podcasts. You're a matchmaker.
Yes.
You bring guests to the podcast with the relevant topics. When you do that in your thinking process, um, how do you go about it and decide that this guest is an excellent match for this podcast because people will enjoy that specific conversation?
I actually love this part of my job because that's where the magic happens. Obviously, we really need to know our clients, the guests, story and topics inside out in order to represent them and in order to find the perfect match for them. So once they sign up with us, we always have an hour-long conversation where we go through everything. You really have to get to know them. And once you get to know the client, you can match to the podcast. But you really have to get to know the podcast as well. So that's why I have a really good relationship with all the podcast hosts I've been working with for many years, because I want to know them. I want to know them. I want to know you, Santi, as a person, not just a podcast host. I would love to know about your business, about your life and your hobbies. Or, when I get on a call with the podcast host, I try to bring the human touch in those conversations and talk less and listen more to these people, because I seriously and genuinely want to know them, because that's how I can match people. I can feel their energy. Are they vibing? Is this a good conversation? Is like a huge gap between them, the way they think? So there's so many tiny things that you have to consider when you match people. But the most important thing is to listen to each and every person, to the host and to the guest as well. And once you do that, like this active, fully be present listening, then you can match them. It's just so easy after a while. And I love that most of my clients are like my friends, and I love working with them because I got to know them so well during this journey.
Hmm. You have heard to hundreds, if not thousands, of podcasts. Is there anything that works for you or any advice you can give to our listeners in terms of matching content to the type of activity? I'm going back to what you're doing and what you're listening at the time that you're doing. Is your content when you commute different than your content when you walk or your content when you are in the gym?
It really depends. I mean, I don't think we have a rule for that, like a rigid rule that like when you are in the gym, you can only listen to, fitness podcasts or whatever, or you can only do, real crime podcast or whatever podcast when you want to chill out. I think it really depends on your mood and on your style, and there are no rules. You can do whatever you want and listen to them. And like I said, I'm cooking and I'm listening to deep conversations like about mindset and business, and I love that part. So I don't think it matters as long as you are present when you listen to these podcasts.
Is there any specific routine you follow before tuning into a podcast? We have an excellent guest the last year called Concetta Cucchiarelli that recommended to prepare for every focus activity that you have, like literally spend, even if it's a few seconds, mentalizing yourself of what's your next thing. Right? Do you follow or advise to follow any focus technique before listening to a podcast?
Think it's important maybe to tune out a little bit and don't consume too many things at the same time, like back to back. Like if I want to, for example, focus on a podcast and I know it's going to be an amazing conversation, I'm so looking forward to it. So I don't do anything else. I'm not listening to anything else before or after. So I need time to process that podcast. So I think you just again, slow down a little bit. Don't consume too many podcasts right after each other, because it just mixes up on your mind, too many thoughts running through your head. So just take your time, slow down when you come to these podcasts, and try to just focus on that particular one.
Let's move to the other chair the other side of the podcast, the one you're sitting in today, becoming a podcast guest. Obviously, there is always a marketing and promotional element of being a guest in a podcast. But from a productivity perspective and more on the preparing for a podcast interview, do you think being a guest in a podcast help people grow personally?
Absolutely. I mean, just imagine the amount of people that you're talking to. I've been doing podcast guesting in the past 6 years. And I think the most beautiful part is that you learn so much from other people, even you are a guest. You always take away something from that interview, even you are a guest. I mean, we have so much to learn from each other. And I think that's the most beautiful part. So it doesn't really matter that you've been guesting maybe just for a shorter time. You always take away something. And I think that's really powerful, probably the most powerful part of being a guest.
For those that are thinking now to become a guest in a podcast, what is your, let's say, 2-3 things that they should be preparing for now?
Well, first of all, check out the podcasts that are available, in the market, which are we have millions of them. So you have a job on your hands. But I would say start with listening to podcasts and get to know the podcast host. Visit their LinkedIn profile, what they're doing. Is their business aligned with what you do? Do you like their energy? And you can only figure this out by listening to that particular episode. So there's one thing. I think that's crucial. And once you found the podcast, obviously you want to pitch yourself to the host. But that pitch that you're sending must be unique. You need to stand out, because podcast hosts nowadays are getting hundreds of emails and podcast pitches daily, basically. Plus, we haven't even talked about the AI-generated podcast pitches that are just coming into the mailboxes. So try to stand out and make time. Sit down and try to figure out how to write a unique pitch that is personalized, that is you, and not just a ChatGPT generated whatever pitch you want to send to the host. I think that's really important, because people will know it and they will figure it out. So just put your soul into that email that you want to reach out to the host. Always don't, when you write a pitch, please don't write a novel or anything like that. People won't have time, and they don't have time to read everything. So try to find a sweet spot when you reach out to the podcast host. I think that's also crucial. And be super clear about your topics and talking points. So many people who approach podcast hosts, they email them and tell them, oh, I can talk about marketing, I can talk about sales. Yeah, that's absolutely fine, but you need to niche down, because that's just too generic. So you have to figure out your own topics and talking points. You have what you want to talk about during a podcast conversation, and you need to practice them. Practice at home, practice in front of the mirror, practice with your partner before you get on a show. Because, yeah, I mean, practice will make you a master of doing things, but it needs time and needs practice. And I could tell you 100 more different things to get ready before a podcast interview. There are so many things that, and of course, again, when you get on a show, when you get accepted, be prepared for everything and anything. You should look presentable and be in that kind of mindset, and give yourself 100% fully, and concentrate, be present when you are on a podcast interview, because that's when the magic happens. Like if you think about like, okay, so what am I going to do after this call? Or people will feel that you're tuning out, and then they lose the attention and they leave the conversation. I mean, if you are energetic, bring your best self to every single conversation.
I love that. Beyond visibility, lead generation, we already said, what are other benefits for those that are podcast guests?
I think that podcast guesting right now in 2026 is the best networking tool and is the best way for relationship marketing. Because many people think that, okay, I did this interview, it went live, whatever, done and dusted, let's do the next one. No, it's not about that. I always encourage people to get in touch with the host, first thank them after the interview, then hop on a, just a chat after the conversation, basically after the interview ended, and figure out how you can help, how you can serve each other. Because I've seen so many business relationships, friendships, just blooming out of one single podcast interview if you use it wisely. So I would suggest get on a post-interview chat with the host. You can always email them and ask them about it. And because that's where the magic happens again, that's how you can build relationships. That's how you can network. That's how you can ask other podcast recommendations from the host, because podcast hosts talk between each other. They know each other. So if you want to get on other people's podcast, just ask them. It's like, hey, do you know any other great host that would love me as a guest? And they won't say no, because they know at least 10 people that would love to have you on their show.
And I can give attestation, Noémi, of the relationships. In this 70 plus episodes we have released have made a lot of unique connections, I would say. And you know what someone told me recently that just came to my mind? Someone that was trying to find a job, and it was attaching the link to a podcast interview as part of the job application. So the hiring managers and HR can see him, he was a guy, in action, some sort of like a pre-interview, and see who he was. I think this is fantastic. It saves a lot of time for the recruiters, and it saves a lot of time for the candidate, because if you want to see me in action, here I am in this podcast.
Yeah, I love that. How brilliant is. I never heard of anything like that, but I think that's a brilliant idea. That's super cool.
Now let's help a little bit people that is on the fence, Noémi. There might be people that is going through a bit of what is called the imposter syndrome. I might not have enough to say to go in a podcast. I'm a bit nervous. Will I be good enough? Would I have enough things to say? How can we help them? Because I'm very sure there are millions of people out there that are either introverts or a bit shy, or they didn't take the first step. How can they? I love the concept of experimentation, controlled experiments, low risk experiments. How can they perhaps experiment without all the nervousness and pressure of trying to pitch for a medium, big size podcast?
I would say start with small, because like you won't fall like so deep if you start with small podcast. They don't have that big of an audience. So you can always like make mistakes. And to be honest, like we all make mistakes, and our first podcast interview as a guest or a host, it wasn't our best one either. So everything needs practice, and people need to be patient with themselves and give themselves grace. And just take your time, take it slow. You don't have to be in John Rogan, in 2 weeks' time when you start podcast guesting. Just start with the small podcast. And if you have podcast host friends, which we all have by now because everybody has a podcast, so ask them first. Ask people like maybe personally or virtually. Ask those people that you like and you have really already like a friend, friendship with them maybe. Like, okay, can I be a guest on your podcast? Because it's so much easier to to test your knowledge or test your podcast guesting experience on smaller shows and in a cozier, friendlier, warmer atmosphere. So just start small. And then, of course, everything needs practice. So after the 10th, 20th, or 50th interview, you'll be absolutely fine. I also understand there are some people are just not perfect for guesting because they might be like, introverts, or they don't like to listen to their own voice, which I hear a lot from people. Like, it's so fascinating to hear that, like, oh, I hate my voice. I can't listen to my own voice. Like, okay, then don't listen back to the interview, because that's only in your head. Like 90% of the things that we are worrying about, it's always just in our head. And the 10% doesn't really matter anyway. So just try to imagine a podcast conversation as maybe a friendly chat between two people over a cup of tea or coffee. Don't think about the rest. Don't think about like hundreds and thousands of people who might be listening to this conversation. Like, you're sitting at home, usually in your home office or office, and you're talking. Like, this is not like keynote speaking and then 1,000 people like watching you from afar. So yeah, just enjoy. And I think try to enjoy it as much as you can, because that's the most important part.
I love what you said about it's in your head. This frame there that some people in the audience have asked me what it says, because it's not very visible in camera. Perhaps I need to take care of this. It says, I'm an old man who have known great many trouble. Most of them never happened. And I think it's attributed to Mark Twain. So
yes, yeah.
the people that is listening now, that is thinking, oh, should I be on a podcast now? I encourage them to reach out and to try it, because this is absolutely free. 99% of what we think it's risky or a problem is just imagination. Noémi, what is the biggest mistake people make when pitching themselves to a podcast, the one that gets them ignored almost immediately?
When they don't listen to the podcast and they have no clue what the podcast is about. I heard these horror stories when sales and marketing podcasts getting pitched by yoga instructors, because they just didn't take their time to listen to one single episode or to check out the podcast. And then you go absolutely wrong, and they will ignore you from the moment your email arrives in their inbox. So I think it's just being respectful with the host and listen to an episode. At least read the show notes, the description of the podcast, do a bit of research, because without research, you can't really focus on the perfect podcast for yourself and for your business.
So research. And then I have a question about, I think it's broader, it's perhaps public speaking, but what do you think in your experience about, after listening to so many podcasts and guests and hosts, makes a guest really, really good? What is the couple of things that you would say is the must have, is the pepper that every guest must have?
You must be open. You must be vulnerable when you are on a show. And maybe it's a cliche, but be yourself. So I'm the same Noémi as I'm usually at home. So just bring yourself to the table. Like, don't put on a mask or something that I'm this whatever professional, because people won't align with you and with your message if you are acting. I mean, you can smell that like far away. So I think it's like being open, being vulnerable, being present, and really listening to the host and interacting with the host. I think it's crucial when you are a guest. And of course, don't forget to smile, because no one likes a guest who is not smiling. And I think that's important. Even if they don't see you, they hear you. And even someone is really serious or really monotone, people again will tune out. They won't align with you.
How do you deal with feedback for guests? Because I imagine that especially in the internet era, some of the feedback people give, and I am an own victim of this kind of victim. Well, victim is not. feedback is feedback. Feedback is not victimism. But I have seen some comments that made me probably want to hang the microphone. How do you recommend people deal with feedback and tough feedback and trolling even in the internet?
I mean, trolls are everywhere. So I would say it's easy to say that just don't pay attention to those people because you just feed their ego or feed their whatever is in their head and just who cares? It's their opinion and you have your own opinion. I know it can be a bit harsh and it can hurt our ego, but we have to deal with it. This is life. I mean, you just have to get used to it that not every people is absolutely nice with you, but you never know what's going on in their lives. So I just take it in that space. Like, I don't really pay attention to those. And thankfully, I would say my clients got pretty good feedback from the podcast host. So I'm really glad for that. But of course, that's why when you hire a podcast booking agency, because some clients told me, tell me which podcast host did say no to me as a guest. And I told them, it's like, no way I'm going to tell you that, because that's why we work with you. We take the no's and you take the yeses. And that's absolutely fine. It's like, it won't damage your ego. It's just fine.
More a content question than podcast per se, Noémi, but I mean, generally you see that what catches attraction in the internet is the get rich quickly type of content these days. Trading, become millionaire, billionaire, get a Lamborghini. Do you think this type of content is somewhat shadowing a bit too much thought leadership, or more well thought, or more human, less materialistic content these days?
I think it's less and less. The effect is less and less shadowing nowadays. I remember when I started in the online marketing space back in 2007, that was all about these getting rich schemes, whatever, Lambos and yachts and everything. And it was so just deceiving and all these, dream world people built up. But nowadays, especially since AI appeared and you can generate anything in 2 seconds and you can do anything with it, I think people crave realness and not fakeness. And they recognize it now so much easier. They want the human connection. They want the human touch. And in my opinion, heart-centered leadership is just becoming more and more important in the podcasting world, and not just the podcasting world, but like in the online world as well. And people crave realness. People crave being seen, heard, and valued and in different spaces. So I think it's getting more and more important as the tech improves or AI takes over the world. So I think it's this human touch will be just kind of priceless in the upcoming years and decades.
Let me drop then the mandatory AI question in this podcast. Hashtag AI. So I can perceive that you're not a big fan of fully created AI podcast. Obviously, neither am. Do you think AI has a space in the podcasting world and any step of the podcast life cycle, like perhaps research or other parts of it?
I love AI. I love using AI in my work because it helps me save so much time when it comes to research, when it comes to you just setting up things. It's a brilliant tool, but it will never replace the human connection, no matter what we do. I mean, this part, what we're doing now, yeah, you can replace it with 2 AI figures or whatever, but that's not us. I mean, that would take away from the worth of the conversation. So yeah, you can make a perfect AI interview, but who would listen to that? Like, honestly, like people, they want to like shoot movies with AI and so on and replace amazing actors or actresses. I don't think that would be would be the same worth. And yes, there's a place and time for using AI in the podcasting world, like editing, creating amazing images for your podcast, creating descriptions for your podcast, show notes, whatever. You can use it for so many things. It saves you time. It's a tool. It won't never replace the human part and the human conversation.
I have 5 questions for you. Quick-fire questions. I have very humanly crafted,
Okay.
and I'm going to ask you to answer in 30 seconds or less.
Okay.
You ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it, Santi.
Number 1, the one podcast you would recommend to any professional who has never listened to a single episode.
It's The Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett, my favorite. So yes, start with
I
that.
also love this one, Noémi, but I had hoped in my little heart that you will say this podcast. No, I'm just kidding. Number 2, honest answer. How many podcast episodes do you have saved that you never finished?
A few. Only a few, because I keep them, save them, and then go back to them if it's really interesting. So I'm a listener, so I don't just when I start something, I finish it too. So
What is the best thing you ever learned from a podcast that actually changed how you work or how you think?
it's the small steps approach that, like, especially when you have, you are down or you have bad days, even if you do just a few small things, you can still get to your goals. So the small step approach in life, I think I learned from one very particular conversation, which I loved.
If you had to choose for the rest of your life, guest or listener?
Guest all the time. I love guesting. I love, getting asked great questions. So guest, absolutely.
Okay, then number 5, pitch yourself for the world's biggest podcast, Steve Bartlett podcast, in one sentence. Go.
Okay, so I help people turn podcast conversation into real human connection, authority, and long-term business relationships, and not just about visibility.
Steve, I know you're here to this podcast, so take a look at Noémi. I hope to see her very, very soon in one of your episodes. Noémi, let's wrap this up. How can people work with you, guests and hosts? How they can get in touch, and how can they avail your podcast magic matching services?
You can always visit our website, which is Podcast Connections, plural.co, and you can get in touch with us there. And you can always get in touch with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active, so if you might type my name in, Noémi Beres, you always find me there. There's a tiny microphone sign next to my name, and get in touch with me, and let's have a chat and figure out if we can work together.
Noémi, thank you so much for teaching us a bit better the relationship between the creators and the listeners and consumers at the end. What I'm taking away today, and I'm going to hyper summarize it today in one single keyword, is authenticity. It's about human authenticity. Podcasts are beyond marketing and having a visible brand and selling. Is about this thing we're doing today, talking and surfacing all our humanity all together. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for interviewing me, Santi. It was an honor to be here.
Thanks for listening to Productivi-Tree. I hope you found something useful in today's episode. If you did, and it helps improve your life even a tiny bit, that'll make me really happy. Remember, you can find Productivi-Tree on all major podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed the show, why not share it with a friend who might also find it helpful? Until next time, and keep growing and stay productive.